Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 3 of Back to Watercolors. I want to start off by saying thank you so much for being here and helping to support my channel. We are almost at 300 subscribers, which is so amazing and such a, exciting thing to celebrate. That was one of my low end goals for this year, is to reach 300 subscribers. If you're not familiar with my goals, check out my January art vlog where I talk about what my goals are for this year, and that was my low end goal and we've almost reached it, and I'm so excited because 300 people is a lot of people. I know I'm a small channel, and when we're used to seeing thousands and millions of people per channel, 300 seems pretty small, but 300 is actually really great, and I don't even think I know 300 people super well. So to have all of you here supporting me, it means so much to me. Thank you so much for being here, and let's get back into the episode. This palette might seem very familiar to you. You've probably seen it peek its little head through in a couple of videos here and there, but I haven't formally introduced it in any of my previous videos. So this palette is a palette that I custom picked out colors. Most of them are Daniel Smith and Schmincke watercolors. All of them are granulating. I did have one spot left in my palette and I decided to add ultramarine deep. So this is different than ultramarine blue. This ultramarine deep has PB29 and PV15, and the PV is a violet color, which is pretty common throughout this lineup of watercolors I discovered. So a lot of the watercolors I have in this palette also have PV15 in it, and I was curious how this ultramarine deep would mix with the colors that I had on this palette. So each swatch is the normal color without M-Gram's ultramarine deep, and then the second swatch is with ultramarine deep. And I did notice that I picked a lot of colors that are very pink and purple leaning, and I didn't pick these colors with a specific plan. I just picked colors that I thought were interesting and heavily granulating and that I would like to use in my portrait paintings. In my paintings, I primarily use this palette when I want to add some granulation into my illustrations, but I do also have two palettes that you saw that I scooted to the side of Handmade watercolors, and they're also granulating watercolors. So I tried to mix my palette up a little bit and use those Handmade watercolors as well, especially when I use my studio grade paper. I often reach for those Handmade watercolors because I do enjoy the colors that I selected, which are, when you see them, you'll know. I do have a preference, I think, and it's very interesting what that preference is. If you notice, leave a comment down below. You probably clicked on this video because you're also curious about granulating colors and how to use them in your work. I've only had experience with granulation in watercolors and gouache. I do have a couple inks that granulate, but I don't know much about inks and what makes them granulate. Maybe it has to do with them being water-based inks, I'm not really sure. But I'm still learning every day, so maybe I'll have an answer to that soon. I would like this video to serve as a video diary or journal that we can update and learn from as we go. So let's go. Alright. From what I've learned reading about granulation, I read that granulation is when pigments in the paint formula cluster together, creating an uneven wash. The larger pigments in granulating watercolors or gouache seem to float in the water instead of sinking into the paper fibers to produce textures. The texture is large because of the characteristics of the pigment particles. That means each pigment that might granulate has different characteristics and might granulate differently than the others. A very common granulating color is ultramarine blue, PB29. This is the pigment code for most ultramarine blue colors on the market. You might see it pop up in other granulating watercolor formulas because it's pretty common. You might see it pop up in a few of the sets that I have here. In my second swatches of each color that I have in my granulating palette, I use a version of PB29 and PV15, a violet pigment. This version is called Ultramarine Deep, also a granulating blue. Because of PV15, I believe the paint swatches lean closer to purple. I will share swatches of the same paints using PV29 just out of curiosity to see if it leans a little less purple violet. In my main granulating palette, I have Professional Paints by Daniel Smith and Schmincke. The first swatch is just the color, and then the second swatch is the color mixed with Ultramarine Deep. In my palette, we have Daniel Smith Moonglow, Daniel Smith Amethyst Genuine, Daniel Smith Ultramarine Red, Daniel Smith Rose of Ultramarine, Daniel Smith Ultramarine Violet. Here are some close-up shots of each of the paint swatches, almost completely dry but not quite. And then next to the paint swatches, I have the paint mix with Ultramarine Deep, just to see what kind of mixtures I could get. Next is Daniel Smith Lunar Blue, Schmincke Galaxy Pink, Schmincke Pottery Pink, Schmincke Glacier Brown, Schmincke Forest Brown. I really love the mix that I got with Forest Brown and Ultramarine Deep. It's such a fluffy, soft green blue. I am thinking a lot about how I want to use it in a future painting. It's just so pretty. I love it. Here's some close-ups. Schmincke Forest Gray. I really like how deep that ultramarine was able to get that forest gray. It is pretty on its own too. And then we have Schmincke Tundra Violet, also another favorite. I loved how the lighter brown pigment stands out from the blue. And then we have Schmincke Tundra Blue. And the ultramarine deep I use is from Magello Mission Gold. Here is one brand, I guess you can call it a brand. Here is one Etsy business, Handmade Watercolors. This is a growing collection, so I only have a few colors that I was interested in, and I'm waiting for a restock of others. But for now, I have Vintage Red, Shadow Wood, Fairy Purple, Fairy Turquoise, Moody Purple, Forest Blue, Indigo Purple, and Methyl Violet. Here is my second tin of Handmade watercolors. In this tin, I do have all the colors that I'm currently interested in, and they start from Flame Red, Peach, Weathered Rose, Ultramarine Magna, Dark Planet, Turquoise Violet, Turquoise Blue, Ocean Wave, Deep Sea, Cobalt Green, and Shadow Green. So this figure might seem very familiar. I just couldn't, I guess, give up on the concept without trying again and seeing if I could, I don't know, make it better than it was before. So it is a bit different, but the overall figure is pretty similar or somewhat the same. I did leave out the arms because I just didn't feel confident enough about how I painted it the first time, but I did change the angle of the head slightly and the angle of the body a little bit, and the concept is a little bit different than the original. The color palette, I didn't really give much thought to it. I knew that yellow, oranges, and purples do really well together, and I love throwing in turquoise blue whenever I can. I decided to make the background a very opaque color, so I used my gouache instead of watercolors this time to paint the background. I decided to be a little bit brave, and in order to showcase the granulation and the non-granulating colors of this painting, I used cold pressed watercolor paper to demonstrate what non-granulating and granulating watercolors look on this paper. Cold pressed paper is really good because it has texture, and I think that for me at least, you see more of the granulation when there's tooth and texture to paper. I do have a preference and I like to use hot press paper, and you can see lovely granulations on hot press paper. I've only used my cotton hot press paper with my granulating paint, so I don't know how my cold press cotton paper would look, but I am excited to try it out. And I just gotta get over the hump of using expensive paper sometimes and just go for it. Throughout the painting, I did just do it in one day and kind of one sitting. I did take some breaks here and there, but for the most part it was done within 5 to 6 hours. The reason why I just wanted to kind of do a speed painting in a way was because I didn't want to spend too much time on the painting when it was just kind of figuring it out kind of painting. I wasn't thinking about it as a super serious painting. I just wanted to at least try to paint this figure again and paint the concept again. Mistakes were made. I did have to stop what I was doing before when I was painting the hair, because I would like to do the face before the hair, because the hair is going to layer on top of the face layer, so it just makes sense to do the face before doing the hair. I feel like when I use the studio cold press paper, it feels like I'm drawing instead of painting. It's a very interesting texture. I don't know how to explain it, but it's I don't know, it's interesting to paint on because it doesn't feel like I'm painting. It just feels like I'm drawing in or sketching and rubbing in the paint, trying to get it to settle. And it is definitely harder to have the paint spread because it is studio grade watercolor paper, so it only has 25% cotton and the rest is cellulose, so the paint doesn't quite move the same way that cotton paper does. So that is a little bit of a challenge that I faced. Another challenge was when I used I believe it was lavender. So this is lavender that I'm using for the hair, and it was definitely challenging because it is slightly opaque, granulating, and it has white pigment in it. So it doesn't move. I don't know, maybe it's just my paint. It feels kind of glumpy and clunky. So after I did this painting, I decided I would not like to use wisteria and lavender in this way, like not for big paintings because it just doesn't spread the way I need it to. For the bodice and sleeves, I decided to use Galaxy Pink, or is it Galaxy Rose? I'm not really sure. It's by Schmincke and Ultramarine Deep. I think it's Galaxy Rose, yes. So I used those two, and you don't see much pigment separation when I use these two paints together, but I thought that the purple violet of the color mixture looked very pretty and I wanted to use it in a painting. So I decided to use it here because Oranges, yellows, they always look good next to violets and purples. Lately, I've been feeling like I'm in a purple era of my painting journey or something. I don't know what it is, but I've been super attracted to purples and wanting to use them in my art recently. And I think I talked about this in the last episode, but purples, for some reason, when I scan them in and try to edit them in Photoshop, I have trouble getting the accurate color. I have trouble getting accurate colors when it comes to the purples. And I don't know if that's just I need to look up how to edit purples better in Photoshop, or maybe it's the scanner, or maybe just purples don't turn up really well when you scan them in. I don't know. If you have any idea, please let me know, because I am super confused and it's kind of frustrating because I really do enjoy purples and I would like to use them more in my art, but I just have trouble scanning them in. So I don't know if I have to start removing them from my painting practice, which would be really sad because I think they're so dreamy and pretty. Here is a close-up of the finished painting. In my community tab, I asked all of you what was your favorite thing about watercolors, and it was a almost 50-50 between granulation and transparency, which I found very interesting because transparency is one of the hardest things that I had to get used to with watercolors, especially when using watercolors like on cotton paper. You can see those layers, and if you're not careful, you can get mud very quickly. So like learning how to layer the watercolors on top of each other because of that transparency is very cool, but very challenging for me. So thank you for participating in my poll, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye. Take care.